Welcome back, Inebri-ites. This is your humble host, Andy, as always, and we're headed into spooky season. Our favorite time of the year. Kind of all our podcasts are starting to have an October theme, and just by chance, I received an email that was intended for our friends over at America's Hometown Horror, but in true podcaster form, I captured the guest for myself. And so I'm joined by author John Minster. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And, we love the guys over at America's Hometown Horror, but if we can get the guest first, we're gonna. So you got a new book. Is it out or is it coming out?
It's coming out right now. It's with the publisher. It's in cover design and final copy editing. And it's supposed to the beta reader copies are going to mail out in about a month, and then hopefully by Halloween it'll hit bookstore shelves.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you're kind of down in a very historic area, which I kind of tend to take for granted sometimes. Growing up in Massachusetts, we have Plymouth and Salem and all these historic places. Did you find any of that influenced you into the horror genre? Because where there's history, there's ghost stories.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. It's funny. I was a Cub Scout Cub Master for a number of years. The first Speaker of the House, his last name is Muhlenberg, Friedrich Muhlenberg. His direct descendant Byron was one of my Cubs.
Okay.
And the Muhlenberg homes and the country's first Lutheran church, Augustus Lutheran Church, founded by this Muhlenberg patriarch. I live in that town. Okay. But near me is Valley Forge Park, and we all know what that is. And the Undertaker's daughter, it's set in Valley Forge Park.
Okay.
At least certain scenes. So yeah, it's historic. But then if you ever get over to Israel and Tel Aviv and Palestine and that area where I do business over there, and then take a couple days to view it's a totally different vibe than what Andy, we're a couple of 100 years old over there. We're stretching back to the patriarchs. You're walking literally the same steps as Jesus of Nazareth and King Solomon and King David, and you're there. So that's the totally different vibe. But
yeah, I remember I was in Sweden probably about 20 years ago, and the tour guide brought us by this unassuming stone building that had this wrought iron sign out front. She's like, "That's a pharmacy that's been a pharmacy for 600 years." And it was just like, oh my God, so they sold leeches, like what else could they have possibly sold? Go tie this chicken to your leg, you'll be better. That's...
Wow, 600 years. Yeah. I remember reading about Nostradamus. He was into that, not just seeing the future, but growing his own herbs and early cures. So yeah, I can imagine they had little clay containers filled with weird stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about that?
So when you're over there, is there the same kind? Because I really feel like anything in the United States where there's some sort of historical event, people are like, it's haunted. Is there that same kind of mentality overseas? Do they even think about haunting?
Well, that's a good question. Basically, no. The pre-Islamic, Islam took over a lot of that area in 630 AD, February 15th or 12th. February 12th, that's when Muhammad took over the Kaaba in Makkah, which is now Mecca. Prior to that, there was a heavy belief in pagan forces, all these different gods Hubal and Uza, and there's 30, 40 different and spirits out in the desert, the jinn, which where genies came from, genie in a
Yep.
bottle. So there was a heavy belief, and despite the fact that the conqueror Muhammad, brought Islam to the Arab world, there's probably still a belief in spirits in that, like Palestine and those areas where I've toured and met lots of people. Yeah, I'd say there's some, but not in Israel so much. They're the the Jews aren't big on spirits still with us, haunting us. But yeah, clearly in this area and the United States, in your area, oh my gosh, Andy, Salem and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be like the 7-Eleven down the street's haunted. You're like, it's 3 years old.
Yeah.
No, we don't know it's haunted. I swear it's haunted. Yeah, that's constant.
Yeah. Yeah, they claim here. There's near me is General Wayne Inn.
Sounds really familiar.
Yeah, General Wayne from the Revolution. And it's funny. A friend of mine bought a house that was occupied during the Revolution, and he fixed it all up. But it's he told me, and please keep in mind, this friend of mine is worth a couple $100 million. He's a tech bro.
Okay.
He lives in California, but he has this house here. He's from Shamokin, Pennsylvania originally. And he's a former U.S. Marine sergeant. And he's the most unspiritual, sober, serious man of this world that you would ever meet. He doesn't believe in ghosts, but when he was fixing the place up, he stayed there in this house, and I've been in it. And it was occupied. It's got secret passages so they could protect themselves from local Lenape Indian raids and things like that. So way back, 1609, I think it was built. He said he was asleep on his bed, and he kept waking up because he felt weight on the bed, and he's a bachelor. It's not like a wife or kid or something like that, or a pet. He doesn't like pets. So he felt this weight, and it kept waking him up every night. And he also has one window, like Amityville Horror window, sort of octagonal, where it's covered with blue bottle flies year round, dead of winter. It's covered in flies. And he kept waking up from a old fashioned bell ringing, a bell, like the old, really old first generation phones, Alexander Graham Bell phones. And he would wake up, and he took me in the basement and he showed me there was this old bell. It was these two metal circles with maybe a magnetic, toggle.
Oh, that kind of like bounces back and forth.
Exactly, like the old alarm alarm clocks. Up in the ancient ceiling, with all the horsehair mortar and all that. It was up there. It's been up there for 100 years. That's the only bell in that house, and it would wake him up at night. No, it's not connected to any electricity or anything. So again, who knows? Who really knows? I mean, it spooked him out. He stopped staying there until the renovation was complete. But again, he's not a spiritual guy.
Yeah. So where did your appeal, or your interest, I should say, in horror come from? Because I feel like horror people are extremely passionate about horror.
Yeah. Well, it started at a very young age with I don't know if I should say this, but like teachers always said, high imagination, when I'm second grade, third grade, but it goes way deeper. Nightmares every night. I can remember nightmares I had when I was 6 or 7 years old. They're almost like movie scenes that are like actual memories of events that took place. I can
Yeah.
remember them now. That's how clear they are from that age. I'm almost 60. Um, and so, I would walk in my sleep. My parents would find me at the top of the stairs about to leap down like Superman. I was asleep, but
Mm-hmm.
walking in my sleep, dreaming about flying. So I have a very active day and night imagination. It's just who I am. I still wake up and punch walls, or not wake up, but punch walls, which wakes me up.
Yeah.
Things like that. And so it's always fascinating me. And I read all these books, Hardy Boys, whatever was
Mm-hmm.
available back in the 60s, 70s. And by age 8, I had read everything from H.P. Lovecraft and
Oh,
Edgar
yeah.
Allan Poe,
Yeah.
and I was hungry for more. And it wasn't until I was an early teenager that Stephen King, your neighbor, started rolling.
Mm-hmm.
And my friends and I snapped that stuff up. I mean, as soon as he came out with a book, one of us had a little bit of allowance money. We'd buy it, read it, and then share it, and then get
Amongst your friends,
together and
yeah.
and talk about the scariest scenes. And so, uh, it. I guess, Andy, after reading a lot of so-called horror, I mean, people define it differently. A lot I see now, what sells
Mm-hmm.
are like romances with a ghost.
Okay.
That there's and they call that horror.
Kind of the Twilight type
Yeah, yeah.
romance type stuff. Yeah.
Look at Stephanie Meyer, her success, incredible. I mean, but it's all about. It's really about these characters, the Cullens and the Bella Swan and all that. It's about love. These are
Mm-hmm.
love stories with a dark edge, and that's what sells. But I'm like a Clive Barker, Stephen King guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want hardcore horror. I want to feel the tingle. I want to turn the lights out in my room and wonder what's in the shadows. So that's where I headed with my writing. Undertaker's Daughter probably has a little something for everyone in it. There's love in it and there's a happy ending, things like that. But there are hardcore horror elements as well. And other stuff that I've written is truly meant to compete with King and Barker and whatnot. It's hardcore.
Yeah.
And that's my true passion. So
Yeah. It's this interesting, where, I mean, true horror is about kind of scaring yourself into that, adrenaline rush or that fight or flight feeling. Why we like to do it is a whole nother story, but somehow there's a subsection of fans that do romanticize it in a way. And, it's even as far back as, Dracula, for some reason, the monster that would come in and drain your life was somehow quote unquote sexy.
yeah,
It's a very strange dichotomy.
it is. And there are many consumers of that, of the vampire chronicles. And you look at the book covers, it's a handsome young man with 8-pack abs
Yep.
and
Yeah.
oiled, light and shadow, and this is horror, but supernatural horror with gore and all that. That's, I guess, it's a smaller audience,
Yeah.
but
And
that's where I dance.
and it's also like the thing that I've been watching a lot of lately is kind of taking it in the opposite direction. It is kind of taking that what should be horrific and finding what's funny about it is, things like Shaun of the Dead and things we do in the shadows. And I mean, Shaun of the Dead is great because it starts off really funny, but then becomes pretty scary by the end.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I agree. Now, let me ask you, since obviously you watch horror, I don't know how much you read. We can get to that, but what horror movies did you brought out that tingle, that tingle of fear?
So I don't read a lot. I'm a For regular listeners, um, from what I have pieced together, I am dyslexic and no one ever told me. So reading is not enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I am a big movie fan, and I don't know if I've watched anything in a long time that's given me the tingle, but the one that used to freak me out the most as a kid was any movie that started with based on a true story.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't realize how vague that statement really is.
Yeah.
So, me 12, 13 or whatever, I'm like, oh my God, this is real.
Yeah.
And that was the stuff that would keep me up at night and, give me the shivers. And so it was that idea that this is not a movie, but a retelling of what actually happened. And then as an adult, you're like, okay, so that can be a really vague statement. You can be like, oh, there's a guy John in the movie, and there's a guy John in the real town that's based, air quotes, on a true story.
Right.
They can be really vague about it, and it's all, if the bed moves a foot on the floor in the movie, it's flying across the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that kind of like, okay, it's dressed up for cinema. So I don't know whether just in my old age I got cynical that I'm just like not as scared. And but slasher stuff never scared me. To me, that was just too unrealistic. So I think it's the idea that I think if I was gonna I know exactly what gives me that. And I don't know if you'd consider it horror. Black Mirror.
Black Mirror. I don't know if I saw that.
So
Black Mirror.
it was on Netflix. I think initially started off on BBC, and it's more sci-fi than horror,
Okay.
but it is one of those things that it's set in the very near future, and it's so close to where we are now that it's just a slight divergence. So there's in every episode is independent, kind of like Twilight Zone,
Mm-hmm.
but they definitely kind of live in the same universe. So there'll be certain technologies that'll be shown in one episode that carries over into another, but none of the characters are the same.
Right.
And there's like an episode where they have a social media app that you rate your interactions with other people on like a 5-star, 1 through 5 stars. And you can do it like constantly. If you bump into me in the street, I can instantly rate you. But then how it gets like horrific is if your rating drops too low, you can't have a certain job. If your rating drops too low, you can't live in a certain place. People won't invite you to their wedding because your rating's too low. And it's this how social media can completely influence your life with like how we are now, but on steroids, to the point where you're like, oh my God, this could happen within 5 years. And to me, that's the scary part, is like, oh, that could
yeah.
And there's so many weird, there's another one where they're testing kind of like almost like a VR video game, and the guy kind of gets like absorbed into the game. It's really, really good, and I find it very disturbing. I don't know if I'd call it horror, but it definitely gives me those kind of chills where if I'm not in a good headspace that day, I'm not watching it, because I'll just be like, what's the point?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, sounds like it is real in China with the social credit score system.
It's that kind of that same thing. And it's very good but disturbing. If you're gonna watch it, skip the first episode, go back and watch it later.
Oh yeah.
The first episode is not an accurate representation of how good the show is.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's you just gave some insight into what gives you the tingle, and it's reality. I agree. The supernatural. All of my stuff has a supernatural element.
Yeah.
Um, because it could happen, and you can't, as reader, you cannot prove that it can't happen.
Right.
Right. But yeah, just campy stuff. Werewolves. I have my own theories of where the werewolf legend started with the original, Ed Gein or whatever, some serial killer, and they couldn't believe it's one of their own town members that's
Ed
tearing up
Gein,
their.
was that Leatherface?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Leatherface was based on the real
Yeah, the
serial
real guy.
killer.
Yeah.
Or Dahmer, I mean, humans don't change. We don't evolve. We've been the same for, thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
So you had people that preyed on others back then.
Sure.
And they would, and people didn't travel like they do now. It was one of their own in a village that was doing these horrible things. So they couldn't possibly accept the fact that it was one of their own. So they created werewolves.
Yeah.
So my apologies if anyone is a werewolf fan watching this right now and you love those stories. Some are really good. Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf and
Oh yeah, sure.
Stephanie Meyer's play on werewolves. But let's face it, I like reality, and
Yeah.
those are too abstract for me. It's it can't happen.
Yeah. And it's what you're saying is a very interesting point. Like in ye old times, not only did you not have the forensics that you could be like, oh, that's a human bite or a dog bite or a knife wound, or you had some guy who was selling leeches during the day and he was the doctor, and if he looked at it and said, oh, that looks like a giant dog bite, everyone goes, okay. And that's the end of the story. So,
Yep.
it's so much easier to kind of convince, and they, it's the more you learn, the more you know. But if you don't have the ability to learn, you just kind of have to, well, that guy seems to know what he's talking about. And so the legend spreads. But
Exactly.
Another thing that I really like in horror movies is, don't try to explain it. Like if it's a zombie movie, don't try to explain where the zombies come from. I'm here to see a zombie movie. It's
right.
When, you're trying to come up with a quote unquote realistic explanation of where the zombies come from. You can just be like, oh, disease, experiment gone wrong. But like when you really try to like break it down and get scientific, no, I get it. I'm here to see a horror movie. Don't waste my time with over explaining. Or I think some of the best monsters are the monsters you hardly see, because then your mind fills in what scares you, opposed to they show you the monster and you're like, oh, that just looks silly.
Godzilla, see the zipper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or just, the special effects guys, like, this is what scares me. And you're like, yeah, I'm fine with bugs. Bugs don't scare me. That's not scary at all. So it's being scared is such a personal thing.
Yeah.
So how do you write to scare people when it is so personal? Like, how do you just kind of write what scares you and hope it translates? Or
Yep. That's exactly, you nailed it. It's being a hardcore, jaded, lifetime horror fan. I write to scare myself, to entertain myself, and if somebody else is entertained by it, win-win. But you're right. So I don't write to any one particular group.
What genre do you find scary? Obviously, it's not werewolves, but I mean, is it the slasher? Is it, more of a ghost type thing? Like what?
Demons.
Okay.
Demons, spirit world, dark spirits. This is a lot of people believe in God. In billions of people. Not so much over in Asia, but certainly other continents. They believe in either the God, the Christianity and Jews, Judeo-Christian God, or the Islam, Allah. But they think about it. I believe, but they don't think about his fallen angel, the opposite number. They give almost no thought to that. They
Yeah.
don't talk about that. It's almost like he's convinced the world that he doesn't exist. But if you believe in the Old Testament, and some believe in the New Testament and the Quran, then you necessarily have to believe in the opposite numbers,
Right.
and the demons, and so that scares me because I believe they're real.
Hmm.
Um, they they exist. They don't. There are stories of possession, like you said, the bed moves or whatever.
Hmm.
And
I was trying to
so
remember what ghost story it was that I watched as a kid. I was probably too young, but it was one of those, ghost story based on a true story, and just scared me for months.
yeah. Well, what did you think of uh, I Am Legend with Will Smith and Alice Braga?
I thought it was entertaining. Um I think it's one of those movies where they relied too much on CGI,
Yeah,
and it hurt it because it ruins that suspension of disbelief when
right.
you look at the zombie and go, oh, I mean, I can tell that's computer generated.
Yep.
Some of the most frightening zombies, um, and I'm sure when the American Hometown Horror guys listen to this episode, I'm going to get text messages being like, they're not zombies. But in 28 Days Later,
Yeah.
yes, they're infected, not technically zombies, but the idea of these mindless creatures that run unfettered, like they as fast as they can run without even thinking about, because there's some point where like your brain is going to be like, don't do that, you're going to hurt yourself. So that is shut off, so they're just going full bore at you, and you can't touch them. Like any fluid, any bite is going to infect you, and that is pretty scary. And it's one of those like that could, I don't think it could happen to that degree, but we just lived through a pandemic, so it's like
Yeah.
obviously disease can spread pretty, significantly, and so it's like that. That's kind of one of those. It's an over exaggeration, but grounded in reality. So
Yeah.
like they were scary.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree totally. It's and that's going to get an audience that includes you, when there's
Mhm.
that the possibility that this could happen. And I think that's what every horror writer should go for. But um,
Yeah.
there's an ass for every seat and a seat for every ass, but no artisan can create a one size fits all seat. So,
Yeah. Hmm.
right.
And,
So,
and when you try to, it tends to water it down,
yeah,
where it's not scary to anybody.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And like you say, my son, he calls it gore porn,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Saw and all
Hmm.
these, that also falls under the horror genre, but it's
Yep.
splatter punk and all that. But could it happen? Sure. But you know, I believe in defending myself, so it's not going to happen to me. It doesn't scare me.
Yeah, and it's one of those. It's probably out of all the horror types, that type of thing probably has happened more than anything else.
Yeah,
With Jeffrey Dahmer, you mentioned earlier. Um, but it just seems so unlikely, I guess, and because the movies ramp it up, and like I love House of a Thousand Corpses. It's a fun movie,
oh yeah,
but
oh yeah.
it just I've never. Hell, there's an annual clown convention in Plymouth, and it doesn't bother me at all. Um, but I love hanging out when they're in town and watching people lose their minds.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah,
Some
it's
people are afraid of clowns.
yeah, and
It,
it's coming back. It'll be the first year back after COVID. And my favorite thing to do is just go out that night. And where I live in Plymouth, there's 40 bars and restaurants within like a mile strip of these two streets. So like it's just there's tons of people there. And you just find a good spot and you sit at a bar and order yourself a beer and then just watch these unsuspecting people as waves of clowns come into the hangout and have beers themselves and do balloon animals for like no reason. It's the most surreal experience.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, why don't you do a cast about it? Just bring a decent Sony one shot or Sure shot or something and post it. That'd be.
It is definitely
I'd
on my
love
list
to
of things
watch
to
that.
do this year.
I would love to watch that.
Yeah, it's so bizarre, and I mean, it right then and there. I mean, it's the perfect, have a murder clown in a murder convention or in a clown convention and goes around and cause trouble. And actually, they now that I think about that, there was supposed to be a horror movie that was shot here in Plymouth, and Plymouth was like, no, thank you, because it was going to take place at the Thanksgiving Day parade. And so that,
yeah,
the town people are like, that's a bad look. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm fun.
Yeah, elected officials. Oh boy. Yeah, that's a friend of mine, a good friend for over 20 years. His name's Anthony Massey. You can IMDb him.
Why don't I know that name?
Well, he's a pretty major Hollywood horror movie producer.
Okay.
Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That was him. He's got Hellraiser Evolutions and some Halloween movies, and he's best friends with Devil's Rejects there, Rob Zombie, House of a Thousand Corpses, etc. So for Undertaker's daughter, he's going to receive the arc and give a quote for the cover.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, I mean, he and I've had these discussions like me and you, and what he finds scary is complete. I thought I Am Legend was plausible, a virus, and the lack of music, the solitude, the quietude, the suspense, and when Will Smith, his character, enters that building chasing his German Shepherd, and he comes across that nest of those dark seekers just huddled together, and he tries to back up.
Breathing,
the breathing.
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the most suspenseful moments in horror movie history, just because the silence and the quiet and the suspense, but Massey with, he thinks, what was that, Valentine? Black Valentine
Deadly
or something?
Valentine?
Yeah, something like that. My Deadly Valentine.
Yeah.
He thinks that stuff is scary. So yeah, there's no pleasing everyone. Clowns, I do have adults, sober adults, with corporate pharmaceutical corporate jobs, and they're terrified of clowns.
Yeah, it's very, very common. And what was I watching? I was watching something recently, and they basically linked, because clowns used to be like kids' entertainment,
Yeah.
And they're like, where did that switch happen? And they linked it back to Gaines. See that?
Oh, no, John Wayne Gacy.
John Wayne Gacy, thank you.
Yeah, killer clown.
And they're like, because at that point, so many parents like went overboard, where they're like, and I think every town had that rumor where there's like, oh, there's someone in a van with a clown mask abducting kids, and so like built into like our society this fear of clowns, and it's really interesting.
That's very plausible.
Yeah.
Because I was a young man when Gacy was first nabbed, and the news broke, and I remember my young friends and I were using him to scare each other.
Sure, yeah.
Because one of his victims escaped and talked about anal rape and all that he was experienced in Gacy's control, and we would scare each other with that. like Gacy's gonna get you.
Yeah, yeah. And then like that builds into like, that fear of clowns. And
yeah.
a podcast I listened to called Monster Talk. It's a great show. They've actually been on our podcast, and they do, and it's basically a scientific look at why there are monsters with a real passion. Like, they love cryptids. They don't believe in them, but they're like, these are kind of the steps that happen. These are, the interesting things. And it's amazing how much pop culture affects that sort of thing. And there's been people who've tracked the Loch Ness monster. They couldn't find a real reference of the Loch Ness monster until King Kong came out. And in that movie, there's the dinosaur similar to that. And I've always said that, not always, but recently have gone under the whole idea that there's reptilian aliens that live amongst us. Never heard of that until V happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes like this: which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the idea exist, or are someone watched the movie and go, "Oh my god, I think that's really what's happening"?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's I just remember going to a drive-in in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania,
yeah.
as a kid, and I drove a orange Toyota pickup truck with a cap on the back, and I had like 2 or 3 couples in the back and
rolling around in the back.
Yeah. So we only had to pay for me, and we backed the truck up to the speaker and hung it there and sat on the tailgate or wherever and all watched this movie called Zombie.
Yeah.
And it was pretty scary, because zombies weren't that novel, or were novel at that time. I guess they were born out of, the Jamaican voodoo
practices.
It was still sort of an unexplored area at that time. And now you've got the Walking Dead series and all these movies we talked about, and World War Z with starring Brad Pitt,
which is an underrated movie.
It is,
but has nothing to do with the book, man. Like,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's a great movie. I always watch it when it comes on rotation, but still, it's like you say, zombies have now become, and zombie apocalypse. You have these Desert Storm vets hunkering down with guns, ammo, and survival kits. Friends of mine, former Marines that saw action, and even they, as hardcore survivalists, refer to the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
It's become a ubiquitous part of society now, this zombie thing. So yeah, I don't know how scary you can make it anymore. I mean, it has been overdone, and done to death.
Oh, sure. My sister was house shopping, and her husband and my nephew, every house that they toured, they were like coming up with their zombie defense plan.
Yeah. Right?
It's just, and it's fun to talk about, and I don't know, I'm kind of an ass, so I kind of like to get people going. And so when someone's like super serious about it, they're like, "Oh, what would you do?" I'm like, "Oh, I'd wear a pink shirt, because zombies can't bite through a pink shirt." And they're like, "No, they can't." And I'm like, "No, they can." And it's just like that idea of like, it's a made up thing. So any made up thing I say, and it's entertaining for me to irritate people, I guess.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh man,
it's just like being in Massachusetts. It's such a crazy sports town, and I'm not a sports person. So anytime someone's like blah 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 Tom Brady, I'm like, wait, he's the one that cheats, right? And they lose their mind.
You don't say that there.
Oh yeah, you do.
Oh no, I would never.
Yeah.
I would never. No, I love it. It's a great state. My son graduated from Brown University in 2014. He might have been a computer science, and he
Yeah.
might have been a junior, or maybe it was a senior year. But he got an apartment. There's a street directly across Mass Ave from Berkeley School of Music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's an apartment building and a head shop, and that's it. And he lived in that apartment building
Nice.
for to intern at TripAdvisor for a
Yeah.
summer and guest teach at MIT there in Cambridge. But I would be up there all the time visiting him, and I found the most amazing thing were the rats. So apparently the Big Dig, you know what that is?
Oh yeah.
Obviously the Callan and the Sumner Tunnel, and they dug everything up. The rats they disturbed their ecosystem. They had no place to go, so they're living among people.
Yeah.
And I have photos. I captured it on my cell phone. His garbage dumpster was around back, and at night I had to go carry a bag of trash out, and I disturbed thousands of rats. And their little eyes that reflect
like the light,
white light. Thousands, big rats. So yeah,
they can be pretty scary too.
Well, yeah.
Even though they want nothing to do with you. It's just the idea. Yeah.
Yeah, they run, but they're in the words of Pulp Fiction, they're Jules, filthy animals, and right,
yeah,
and who knows, rabies. That's a problem everywhere in the Northeast. Sure.
And it's funny you mentioned rats during the COVID lockdown. We had a pretty solid rat problem in my neighborhood because I live so close to the downtown area where there's tons of bars and restaurants. So the rats had plenty to eat, but during lockdown, they were all closed. So they started going further and further and further out. And my landlady one day is like, "Oh, look, a squirrel." I'm like, "That's not a squirrel." Definitely not a squirrel.
Yeah. And I could see the evidence of the government trying to deal with it. There were those giant bait triangles.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But what I saw were the rats. Some rats would eat the bait and die, and the other rats would drag them out, and then they'd use that trap as a home.
Yeah. Hey, man. Any port in a storm, right?
Yeah, they're everywhere. That was a number of years ago. He's 30 now.
Big Dig was a long time ago.
Yeah. He's just turned 30. So, it was a while back. But yeah, hopefully it's gotten better. They've dealt with it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's pretty much over, that whole construction thing. So,
yeah,
I haven't heard anything. I'm sure they're still, the rats didn't go away. They're just probably not as visible.
Yeah, they left again, hopefully. But yeah, Mass is one of my favorite states, especially this time of year. Yeah, probably the most beautiful fall foliage you'll ever see is Mass, Springfield. What's that? Is I want to say 90 or 91.
Oh yeah, 90. Yeah, the Mass Pike.
Yep. Yeah, but it cuts up. Springfield's on your right. It cuts up into like Chittenden, Vermont.
Okay.
That's absolutely the most beautiful display of leaves. And Pennsylvania has its share. We have Jim Thorpe and the Pocono Mountains, but nothing compares to Mass, Vermont border.
You got the Muter Museum.
Oh yeah, we do.
I love the Muter Museum. For our listeners who don't know what that is, go check it out. It is. It's an interesting afternoon.
I have to like the giant impacted bowel.
Yep, that's an interesting one.
That's
the soap lady. The soap lady.
Yeah, and there's Ben Franklin's stuff is in there. Some of his experiments, and that. So you've been to Philly? Yeah.
Oh well, my mother's from Philly. My grandmother used to live in Flowertown.
Oh, okay.
And so as a kid, we went down at least once a year. But the Muter Museum I'd heard about, and my son was performing with marching band down in Washington. So I'd gone down to see him perform there, and I dragged a friend of mine with me, and I'm like, dude, we're gonna stop, on the way back in Philly and spend the night. We're gonna go to the Muter Museum. And he's like, all right, whatever. And it was like the highlight of the trip. It was so much fun. So I got like my Muter Museum sweatshirt, and it's a litmus test for weird people, because like every once in a while someone will be like, oh my god, I love the Muter Museum. I'm like, all right, you're my kind of weird. Yeah.
Well, young people that think they're in love, like a guy has a crush on a girl. He should take her there and see if she has a sense of humor or not.
Yeah,
that'd be a great test.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But like I'm fascinated. Like I grew up on Ripley's Believe It or Not, and that's incredible. All these shows that kind of like highlighted the weird and macabre, and so it's always been a fascination of mine. And so I have like, I don't know, half dozen skulls at home of various creatures and whatnot. And I have a friend of mine that she used to work for animal control, so she has pelts and skulls and whatnot, and invited me over to like a little, little outdoor fire pit kind of thing. And so I'm hanging out there with her boyfriend, and she had just gotten home, and I brought this lady friend of mine with me. And she comes around the corner, and she's holding a skull, and she looks up at this girl, and she's like, oh shit, I didn't realize there was real people here. And the girl I was with goes, ooh, dead thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah. So yeah. And it's like those are my people, that find that stuff intriguing and interesting. And
we're so divided as a country along these dumb lines, politics and religion and all these things. One thing I've learned with all my networking in this horror world is that it's one tent, and you have your far right, your far left politically.
Mm-hmm.
You have straight, gay, and everything in between, trans, LGBTQ. You have churchgoers, moms with 3 kids, who and just the full gamut, and they're all united in horror. So I belong to these Facebook groups and Instagram. All that other stuff that divides us is never talked about. All we talk about is the horror, and people with bones in their noses and 1,000 piercings and body tattoos, to your preppies, and we're all united by horror. It's the coolest world.
Yeah.
Horror world.
Yeah. And it's you're right, it is a big tent, and I always feel like you have the far right and the far left are screaming, and everyone else in the middle is like, shut up, we're trying to have a conversation. And it's like, it may be about horror, maybe about something else, but it's just like, it's so much of it's noise to be noise, to get people scared, really.
And or try to bully people into thinking the way you think and feel the way you feel, and that's a useless thing. But you can't preach to the converted or whatever. But I mean, it's horror is there's a primordial urge to feel a little tingle of fear. I don't know why, but it's in all of us.
It's weird.
Imagine the campfires 10,000 years ago, wearing skins, telling scary stories in a click language. It's part of us. So
and I mean, to this day, one of my favorite things to do is scare someone, not in a creepy way, but I'd be walking down the hall, and my ex-wife would be in the bathroom, and I'd hear the shower shut off, and I would just stand at the door, like almost my nose touching the door, just stand and wait. And then she'd open the door, she'd be like, ah! And I'd be like, all right, cool, my day's done. That's super fun. I don't know why. It's
I agree.
And I kind of feel like everybody does that to people because it's, it's fun, it's silly, and when it happens to you, you get that initial like, oh my god, all right,
jump scare.
Yeah.
Yeah, I buy these animatronics. I haven't done it in years since my son lived at home, but Halloween animatronics that are sound activated, and they pop out giant spider, ghoul, another thing that rises up, and it's all motion or sound sensitive.
Yeah.
So we'd sit there with the movie camera, and lighting was bad, and we'd record it and share it just among friends.
Right. Yeah.
The stuff never got on social media. I wouldn't do that to people.
I was going to say on TikTok, that's probably a huge thing now.
Yeah. Well, of course. But no, we just did it to entertain a small group. But I'll never forget this group of girls, and some of them were like tweens, they were 12, 13, whatever. They were articulate. They weren't just screaming little kids. And they set off all this stuff outside my front door. And I heard the one girl say, I have never been so scared in my whole life. And I'm like, yes, open the door, let her take all the candy, goal achieved, I want to scare people. Yeah.
It's fun.
It is, right?
Yeah. I don't know why. It just is.
It just is. Yeah.
But John, where can people go to find Undertaker's Daughter when it comes out?
So the publisher is they're going to put a pre-sale link up, but it's Hellbender Books, hellbenderbooks.com, and also my website, johnjamesminster.com, and the usual places, Amazon and whatnot. But I would say the best thing to do is go to your local bookstore, because they need money. The pandemic crushed them. I mean, several of my friends went out of business. They had to sell the business because people weren't coming around. So I would go there first. And if they don't have it on the shelf, just ask them. They can order it through Ingram. That's the channel that books are sold, Ingram. They can order it. And that's the best way. Support your local bookstores.
Nice.
So the Undertaker's Daughter.
I'm going to say to Mike, Matt, Kat, and Andrew of America's Hometown Horrors, haha, I got them first.
Only Mike reads anyway.
That's true. I'm pretty sure the rest of them can.
No, they said they read their phones.
Yeah. But so I think it's like episode 309 or something like that. And it's always bothered me that we didn't have a sign off. One of my favorite podcasts is Sawbones. And at the end, the host always just closes with, don't drill a hole in your head. And so it always bothered me. I didn't have a sign off. And then I realized I'm just lazy. So my new thing is I'm going to have the guests give us a sign off. So just give us a sign off.
That thing under your bed that you've been afraid of all these years, it's real. And tonight's probably the night it's going to come up and eat you feet first, alive and screaming.
And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. Thanks again for listening.